I have this old chipper shredder that I need to use. Now, I haven't used this in probably 10 years. It's been sitting outside under a tarp that whole time. Actually, the tarp disintegrated about 5 years ago, so it's been exposed to the elements. Now, I seem to remember the last time I used it that the engine ran okay, except it didn't chip or shred very well, especially this end where you really had to jam stuff through there pretty hard to get it to go through. So the internals here, the blades or the cutters or whatever are inside, probably going to need to be replaced. And now, because it hasn't run in so long, I'm not even sure how good the engine is going to run now. So that might need to be addressed. So let's see, will it run? Will it chip? Will it shred? I had to take the housing cover off to get this freed up. It wouldn't turn. It was all jammed up with like acorns and stuff on the inside. And also this pull start here is kind of messed up. There was absolutely no fuel in this when I pulled it out. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's full of fresh fuel now. We'll give it a few pulls and see if she goes. Yeah, I'm not going to put the front back on this, so this will be spinning. That's if it starts. So probably kind of dangerous. I just got to be sure to keep the dog out of here. So yeah, don't try this at home. And go to somebody else's house and try it. Choke. Put you on. Okay. Yeah, that's a no-go. So I'm going to try the old put some fuel directly into the carburetor trick. Try it again. If she starts up and then dies, then we know that it's not getting fuel through the carburetor. Yeah, it looks like the carburetor is not carbureting. The first thing I noticed on this fuel bowl nut is that it's dry. There's not a drop of fuel on it, so there's no fuel getting down into the fuel bowl. Now these passages through here, the fuel passages, those are clear. A lot of times you see those completely crusted over, so that's actually a good sign, that there's not a lot of corrosion in the carburetor. Actually, on second thought, ignore my last statement. Yeah, carb not looking too good. Pretty typical of an old carb. Just kind of getting eaten away because of the effects of ethanol, so a lot of it missing on top where the float bowl nut goes, also where the hinge pin for the float goes through is eaten away, and then also the needle is completely seized in the bore. That's new. I haven't seen that before. Now the issue is not that it needs a new carburetor. The issue is that they don't make this particular carburetor any longer, and there is no like alternate direct replacement for it. So been digging around the interweb here and trying to find something that might work, that I might need to actually modify a little bit. And the critical measurements I'm looking for is the spread of the mounting bolts, where it attaches to the intake manifold, and also where the air cleaner attaches, and then also the position of that choke rod there, that white nylon piece. That's got to be in the same spot as the old one, otherwise the linkages on the shredder that operate the choke won't line up. So I ordered one that should work, but it'll be a few days before it's in, so in the meantime I'll work on the internals here since I do have the parts all ready for that. And that involves replacing this center cutter here, that's for the brush side, and then these other cutters here on the, I guess you call it the back side, where you feed limbs in here through this auxiliary chute. In order to get these blades on the outside out, I need to take that chute off, and when I did that I discovered it's got a big hole in it. Now, I'm not talking about the one in the top, I'm talking about that one right there. Didn't know that was there, so yeah, something else to fix. And this is Doug. He hangs out a lot, especially when I'm working on projects. He's pretty curious about what I'm doing all the time. He's not too much of a bother, not like Dave, Dave the duck. I don't like Dave. Making some progress. I got the outer blades or backside blades off. One of them came off normally, by unthreading the bolts. The other one I had to cut the bolts off because they were too corroded. And after some finagling and a shit ton of PB Blaster, I got the center blade off also, so that's ready to be replaced. Now these flails here, there's 4 sets of these. These are supposed to pivot on this pin freely, and these 3 do. These 3 over here, not so much. And then the ones below that, those are even worse. And then this set I was working on getting some of the corrosion off, and these actually move freely like they're supposed to. And I'm not going to replace these mostly, honestly, because I don't feel like messing with this roll pin that holds them in. But they don't need to be sharp either. They're blunt on purpose to match stuff up. And I'll show the operation of that a little later on. But again, they do need to be free. So a bunch more PB Blaster and working them back and forth to free them up. And after that, they should work just fine.
3 days later.
I'm going to test fit this carb now. And again, I can't get the exact replacement. Just trying to get something that's as close as possible. And that's if I can find the mounting bolts. I took this off more than a day ago, which means there's a pretty good chance that they're lost. You know, the best way to have things disappear into thin air is to set them down anywhere in my pole barn. When researching carburetors, there were several to choose from. All had a slightly different measurement for the bolt spread on here. I ultimately went with this one because it had 1 round hole and 1 slotted hole. And that way, if my measurements were off just a little bit, I had some margin for error. A couple items I knew I was going to need to address, one being the right angle inlet on the old carburetor needs to be moved to the new one. And 2 is the lever that operates the butterfly, essentially the throttle. On the old one, it's about twice as long as it is on the new one. I tried to find a carb with the longer lever. They just don't make them like that anymore. Of course, that's where the governor hooks up to, and so I need to figure out a way to replicate that length in order for all the throws to be correct and it to operate the right way. I just don't know how I'm going to do it yet. Something I noticed on the new carb though is that the choke lever is pretty hard to move. On the old one, I can move this choke open and close just with my finger like this, but on the new one, it requires quite a bit of force. And I'm thinking that the linkage on the front panel that operates the choke is just going to bend or flex instead of moving the choke if I leave it like this. So I took some pliers and I bent the spring away from the cam just a little bit, and that freed up the action of the choke, and I think it's going to work okay now. The fuel inlet is just a press fit on here. I managed to get this one out of the old carburetor without breaking it. Bonus. I found a YouTube video with a pretty neat hack on how to get this inlet out. I don't remember the channel name, unfortunately, but that's just to use a spacer like this, or I guess you could use a socket and put that on over the inlet and then get a screw, something that will engage the inside of that inlet, and then thread that down in there, and then as that bottoms out on the spacer, it then starts to pull that inlet out of the carburetor body, kind of like using a gear puller. I couldn't get that right angle inlet to go in all the way. I had it in a vise, and it was scaring me how much I had to crank down on it to get it in even that far. So it's not in all the way, but it's in there pretty tight, so I'm sure it's sealed. Plus it clears the heat shield, so I think we're good to go. Here's what I did with that throttle lever. I just ground off the flare that was holding the old one on, and then just put it on top of the new one and secured it with a little bolt. I know it don't look that great, but the geometry is correct, and it'll get the job done. And I just need to move this spring over here to the correct hole directly underneath that Z-bend, and then I should be all set for a test.
That's weird. We usually get the duck and test it out.
Was that who? What? Shove the duck in there?
No, just trim his beak a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, f you, duck. Get out of here. Get out of here. I'm not exactly getting a full range of motion on this pull starter here. Now, a lot of times I can take these apart and just add another revolution to the spring and restore the tension on it. But the way that this one's put together, I can't do that. So you can get these for like $15 for the whole assembly. So I'm just going to replace it. Air cleaner housing back on now, and the choke linkage lines up perfectly with the choke and operates exactly how it should, so that's good to see. I got a new grate. Actually, I think it's technically called a shredder screen. I don't know what happened to the old one. It was completely missing. Probably just rusted away. Anyway, this goes inside the housing, and then as those flails pass by, they pass through the grate, and then pretty much just pulverizes anything that's in the way. And I also managed to get all of these flails freed up so that they're pivoting freely now too. Got the blades on now, the center one of course for the brush side, and then the other two for the limb side. Now this back chute has to go on before the rest of the housing goes on because I need to get access in there, but before that I need to fix this hole in here. I have a piece of metal cut to patch this, I just don't know how I'm going to attach it yet. I don't really want to use rivets because they'll protrude through the other side and might catch on limbs as you try to push them through. And I also don't want to weld it because, well, what I do with a welder you can't actually call welding. Before I put this back together too much, I should probably change the oil, as the oil in here is 20 years old at least. I think the way that this grate was originally held in place was just with some smooth pins that went through all the way to the other side of the housing and then held in with like cotter pins or something. Probably for quick disassembly out in the field if you have to remove it to unclog or unjam the unit. And now I don't know where those pins are. I just happen to have some 5/8 by like 5-inch bolts that I'm going to use instead. I'll drill some holes through the other end where I can use a cotter pin to hold it in place. And that way I can keep the quick assembly, disassembly functionality. Just like a wheelbarrow, the tire is always flat. Actually, I got 2 of them instead of 1. I managed to get some air in there and get it to reseat on the bead and sprayed it with some soapy water, and notice that the side walls are basically dried out and cracked and leaking, and they're still leaking from the bead. That never sealed up. A lot of corrosion in there. And actually, this is the good side. You should see the other tire. Yeah, I don't think Fix-A-Flat's going to work on this. On the other hand, because of all the soapy water I put on them, the tires are now the cleanest part of the whole machine. Okay, ran into a problem. Of course, why wouldn't I? Now I had this whole thing assembled, started it up, and it was making a bunch of noise it wasn't supposed to make. And so I took it apart and I put this screen or this grate in here just for the demo for right now to show you what I'm talking about. Now these flails are moving like they should, pivoting around this pin here, but there were 2 sets of flails that were so worn out that not only were they moving that direction, but they were also moving back and forth in this direction. And so when they would pass through the screen, instead of going in between the bars on here, they were making contact with it instead. And so turns out I didn't want to have to replace the flails, but now I'm going to have to. And actually I'm only going to do 2 sets. There's only 2 sets that are that worn out that need it. And right now I don't want to put more time and money into this yet anyway before I know how well it's going to work.
3 days later.
New flails arrived and installed now, and these are a little bit different than the original. They're all one piece instead of being 3 separate ones, which actually if the originals were done like that, I wouldn't have had to replace them because they wouldn't have been flopping around. And what I did was I put the new ones on opposite sides and then the old ones on opposite sides. That way it's balanced, or at least as good as it can be. All assembled for the second time, and the shredder screen is back in, and now there's supposed to be a deflector on this discharge. It's hinged at the top, and then that way it can flip up out of the way to clean out a jam, and it's secured with these thumb screws or hand screws down at the bottom, and of course those won't move because they're all rusted in place. So they're going to take some persuasion, and I did finally get those free. I'll tell you, my barn is going to smell like PB Blaster for the next month. The new recoil assembly showed up. I originally thought I could get this for like $15, but it turns out the $15 one didn't have very good reviews, so I ended up going with the $24 variety. There were a lot of areas where the paint was just kind of coming off in sheets with a lot of rust underneath. And I had a can of brown primer I just sprayed over those areas. Now it looks like an old Chevy Nova. Time to try this out now, and I got my safety goggles right here. Now it's been a while, but if I remember correctly, Sometimes stuff can get kicked back out of this big chute right here. Wow, it really chips well now. It feels like it's pulling these branches out of my hand, even though there's no feeder mechanism on it. However, it does seem like it bogs down pretty easily, and when it does, it takes a long time for the RPMs to come back up, and I'm pretty sure I know why. I never changed the air filter, and this is the one that was on it, and it looks pretty nasty, and it might even be wet, actually. I don't think it's letting too much air through, so I'm going to go ahead and run this without it just to see what difference it makes, and obviously this needs to be replaced anyway. I'm going to say that that old air filter was definitely holding this thing back. However, there's a few symptoms that are telling me that the valves might not be sealing 100%, so I'm going to drag this back into the shop and see what's what. Looks like I've had some nozzle activity here, and I found this abandoned housing inside the front engine cover. I'm going to take these valves out and see what's what. Of course, in order to do that, I need to get the keepers off, and I don't have a valve spring compressor tool to get those off. Now, there are methods to get them off without that tool. I just hope that I can get those back in without that tool. I got the valve keeper off, but new problem, the valve won't come out of the engine. And a little bit of buildup probably on the valve stem. It won't get past the valve guide, but a little bit of brake cleaner in there, work it in a little bit, and it should come out. Should. The piston at top dead center now, actually about a 1/4 inch below top dead center, and the valve is touching the lifter tappet, and it's not supposed to be. There's supposed to be some clearance in there, so it could very well be that's why the valve isn't sealing all the way, because it's actually not, fully seated. So a lash adjustment is definitely in order, and while I got this apart, I might as well lap the valves too. Alright, a show of hands for anyone who's kicked something around their workshop forever, and when they actually need to use it, it's nowhere to be found. I can't be the only one. Yeah, that's what just happened to me with my valve lapping compound, and I'm not going to go out and buy more. I'll just do the home remedy with scouring powder and toothpaste. Probably not going to be perfect, but it'll be an improvement, and these valves weren't in too bad a shape to begin with, so it's all good. Now there is a special suction cup type tool to attach to the valve, and that way you can spin it in the valve seat to grind it. I don't have one of those tools, but as far as I can tell from watching videos of people trying to use them, they actually don't work that well anyway. But I also seen a few videos of people just melting a hot glue stick onto the valve and then using that as a handle to turn it, so I'm going to try that. Now before starting this operation, I needed to grind down the valve stem a little bit to make sure there was clearance between that and the tappet. Otherwise, if it doesn't seat all the way down, then doing this won't do anything. You're not getting proper contact. And then, of course, as I'm grinding it more and more, it will fall further down into the seat, and therefore I need to check that clearance every now and again. Speaking of items that I've seen around but can't find now that I need them, my feeler gauges. Now the clearance on these valve tappets is supposed to be between 4 and 8 thousandths, and your standard 20-pound printer paper is 4 thousandths, so I'm just using that as a feeler gauge, and as long as it's pretty loose in there, then I know I'm probably at about, say, 5 thousandths, so we'll call that good. You know, I should call this video how to rebuild a small engine without any of the proper tools and materials. You know, once again, I don't have the valve spring compressor tool to put these back in, so I went on the YouTube and I found a trick to do this without it, which is, put it in the vise here and then keep that compressed with zip ties until you get that back in with the retainer, and then once you do, clip the zip ties and remove them. Also, if you haven't figured it out yet, this is not a how-to video on how to rebuild a small engine. If that's what you're looking for, my videos are probably the last thing you want to watch, to do anything for that matter. Now, if you want to see somebody make a lot of mistakes and maybe on occasion actually learn from those mistakes, or see a guy learn as he goes along, or somebody who's resourceful, finding innovative ways to solve unexpected problems, especially if those solutions involve not spending a lot of money, then I'm your guy. Working on the exhaust valve now and using the same technique with the glue stick in order to form a handle to spin it. Now you can sit there forever and hold this while it cools down and the glue sets up, or speed it up a little bit by quenching it with some water. If I can find the videos again where I learned some of these hacks, then I'll leave links in the description. Okay, good tip here. If you're missing a bolt that you just had and you happen to be using one of these portable work lights with a magnet mount on it, check the magnet. It very well could have picked it up, and that way you avoid looking around for 10 minutes for something that was right under your nose the whole time, like I just did. Or better yet, when you remove the bolt, put it on that magnet on purpose for safekeeping. The new air filter arrived, so I'll put that in. Now these tires still don't have any air in them, but they're not flat, and it still rolls around okay, and it's not like I'm rolling this thing all over the lawn. I'm going to move it to one spot and pretty much leave it there, so whatever. The handle just came off my brand new pull start assembly. Now the line didn't break, the knot is still there, it just pulled through the retainer in here. I'm going to have to feed this back through and put a bigger knot on it. I guess going with the $24 recoil assembly over the $15 one didn't really matter. This thing started smoking, and it wasn't doing that before, but I'm thinking it was just burning off some of the leftover hot glue on top of the valves and maybe some residual brake cleaner that was in there, because it did clear itself up. The most important thing though is just how much better it chips and shreds now. You know, what it was designed to do. It mows through everything so fast now, barely breaks a sweat, and it doesn't get jammed up all the time like it used to. Of course, that's mostly due to the new blade set that I put in, and originally thought that's all I was going to have to do. I wasn't planning on all the extra engine work, but overall, couldn't be happier now with the operation. Here's a breakdown of the expenditures. Firstly, the carburetor. Now I didn't get a genuine Walbro, which is probably what was on there to begin with, so it's a cheap knockoff. Fingers crossed that it holds up. That was $15. The blade set was $35. Pull start recoil assembly was $24, and then the flails, two of those were $77, which I think is a lot, considering what they are. But I looked around everywhere, and that was the cheapest I could get. And then that shredder screen was about $31.50, and then the air filter at $8. So the total was about $190. Which was more than I was planning on spending, but considering I got the shredder for free years ago, I guess I can't complain. All those parts I purchased through Amazon, I'll leave links in the description. As usual, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.